Imagine a massive, like a $2 billion hydroelectric dam, right? And it's halfway through construction.
Okay, setting the stage. Big money.
Huge money. So the concrete is poured, the custom-built turbines are sitting at a port somewhere just waiting to clear customs, and suddenly a massive, unmapped underground river just floods the entire foundation.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a nightmare.
Right. Total disaster. The blueprints say one thing, the site data says another, and the general contract has this, really vague clause about unforeseen risks. So work just stops completely. $1 billion is just sitting there in the mud.
Just sinking. Literally.
Exactly. So who actually wins the argument over who pays to pump all that water out?
Well, I mean, it sounds like absolute legal chaos,
Right.
but in the world of mega projects, that exact scenario is actually highly predictable.
Wait, predictable how?
Yeah, the resolution entirely depends on the foundational rulebook that the parties signed, way before a single shovel even hit the dirt.
Okay, well, that is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at the source code that prevents these multi-billion-dollar projects from just dissolving into apocalyptic chaos.
It's fascinating stuff, honestly.
It really is. Specifically, we're looking at excerpts from the FIDIC Yellow Book 2017. And for anyone who doesn't spend their weekends reading international construction law,
Probably most people.
right, most sane people, this is the general conditions of contract for plant and design build. Our mission today is to decode the rules of engagement here.
Yeah, because it functions as the gold standard operating system for global infrastructure. We're looking specifically at clauses 1 and 2 today.
Right, which establish the absolute bedrock of the agreement.
Exactly. You aren't just reading a list of construction chores here. You are looking at a meticulously calibrated, a really careful distribution of power and risk.
So let's jump right into the cast of characters, because Clause 1 gives us the big three in the FIDIC ecosystem. You have the employer, the contractor, and the engineer.
The holy trinity of mega projects.
Exactly. So let's say you, listening right now, are a government agency funding our hypothetical $2 billion dam. You are the employer. You issue what the contract calls the employer's requirements.
Right. And those requirements are basically the ultimate vision board and the boundary lines for the project.
Like the wish list.
Yeah, but a very strict wish list.
Yeah.
The employer defines the purpose, the scope, the specific design criteria. They're declaring, we need a dam, it must generate exactly this many megawatts, and it must survive a once-in-a-century earthquake.
Got it. Then you have the contractor, right, the entity actually doing the heavy lifting. The source defines them as the person or persons named in the letter of tender accepted by the employer.
Right.
But, on a mega project, no single company has the expertise or the capital, really, to build a $2 billion dam totally alone. You might have a German turbine manufacturer partnering with, a local civil engineering firm.
Exactly. They form a joint venture, or a JV. And the FIDIC rules are, they're frankly draconian about how a joint venture operates. And for good reason.
Draconian how?
Well, if the contractor is a JV, all members are jointly and severally liable to the employer.
Okay, I always hear that phrase in, legal thrillers. Jointly and severally liable. Does that essentially mean the employer can treat these entirely separate corporations as one single entity when things go wrong?
That is exactly the practical outcome, yeah. Let's look at the mechanics of it. The employer does not care how the joint venture divides the work internally.
Or how they split the profits.
Right, exactly. If the local civil engineering firm pouring the concrete suddenly goes bankrupt, the German turbine manufacturer is legally on the hook to finish the entire project.
Wait, including all the concrete work?
Including the concrete work, or they have to pay the damages.
Oh, wow. So the turbine company can't just stand there and say, hey, we just build the spinning metal parts, the concrete isn't our problem.
Nope. The employer forces them to form a single risk entity. They totally refuse to play a shell game. They demand one single point of accountability.
That makes sense. You don't want people pointing fingers when billions are on the line.
Exactly. And to enforce this, the joint venture actually has to appoint a recognized leader who holds the legal authority to bind every single member of the group.
So the employer just needs one hand to shake and, I guess, if necessary, one entity to sue.
Precisely. Which brings us to the third player. And this is where the power dynamic gets incredibly complicated. The engineer.
Okay, so in my head, I'm picturing the engineer as a highly paid home inspector, someone the employer brings in to just make sure the contractor isn't cutting corners?
Yeah, a home inspector is way too passive of an analogy for this.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, home inspectors just check for code violations after the work is done. Under FIDIC, a better comparison is a highly paid referee in a championship game.
Okay, a referee.
But, and here's the crazy part, a referee who is inexplicably hired and paid by one of the teams, but legally mandated to call the fouls fairly.
Wait, what? The source text officially categorizes the engineer under employer's personnel. The employer appoints them, the employer pays their, I assume, exorbitant salary.
Very exorbitant, yes.
How on earth can they act as an impartial referee? Aren't they heavily incentivized to just, rule in favor of the people signing their paychecks?
You've hit on the most hotly debated mechanism in all of international construction law. It's a massive point of friction.
I can imagine. It sounds impossible.
Well, on a day-to-day basis, they do act on behalf of the employer. They supervise the work, issue instructions, verify materials, all that.
Okay.
But the moment a dispute arises, say the contractor hits that underground river we talked about and files a claim for more time and money, the engineer must switch hats.
Just immediately.
Immediately.
Yeah.
The contract legally obligates them to make a fair determination based strictly on the contract's rules, taking all circumstances into account.
Man, that has to be a terrifying tightrope to walk. The engineer might have to literally look the employer in the eye and say, hey, I know you pay me, but the contractor is right. You owe them an extra $50 million because your geological data was flawed.
Yeah, and if the engineer blindly denies every contractor claim just to save the employer money, the contractor will just halt work. They'll take the dispute to international arbitration, and the project basically dies.
Wow. So they have to be fair or the whole thing falls apart.
Exactly. The engineer's neutrality, however uncomfortable it is for the employer, is really the only thing keeping the project moving out of the courtroom and on the actual construction site.
Okay, so the fact that the engineer sits right in the middle of this high-stakes pressure cooker, that really explains the absurdly rigid communication rules laid out later in Clause 1.
Oh, the rules are intense.
You can't just have informal chats when a ruling might cost someone $50 million.
No, the rules of communication are basically the armor that protects that neutrality.
I was reading this section on notices, and it is militant. Like, if that underground river floods the site manager can't just text the engineer and say, hey, major flooding, we're going to be delayed a week.
Definitely not.
Even an informal email doesn't seem to cut it.
A text message or an informal verbal warning is basically legally invisible under FIDIC rules. It didn't happen.
The text actually states a notice must be in writing. It must be explicitly identified at the top as a notice.
Right, it needs the label.
And it must be delivered via a paper original signed by an authorized RERP or through a specifically agreed upon, highly secure electronic system. And it only takes legal effect the moment it is physically or electronically received.
Yeah. A notice in this context is essentially the starting gun for legal and financial consequences. It triggers a highly specific timeline.
Like a countdown clock.
Exactly. If you encounter an unforeseeable physical condition like the flooded foundation, the contract gives you a strict window, usually 28 days, to officially give notice.
Okay, let me guess. If you miss that window because you just sent a casual email instead of a formal notice, you lose the right to claim the extra money.
You forfeit the claim entirely.
Wait, really? Just gone?
Just gone. You could be out tens of millions of dollars over a formatting error.
That is brutal.
It is, but it forces absolute, undeniable discipline. The rigid format removes the whole, oh, I thought we discussed this over coffee defense.
You're right. I told you about the water on Tuesday.
Exactly. When billions are on the line, memory is completely irrelevant. Only the paper trail matters.
Which naturally leads to the massive headache of what happens when the paper trail argues with itself, right? You have design specs, schedules, safety protocols, legal boilerplate. Contradictions have to be inevitable.
Oh, they are a mathematical certainty on a project of this scale. You can't avoid them.
So the FDI contract anticipates this with the priority of documents. It's a literal hierarchy. If two documents fight, the one higher on the list wins out. Looking at the list, it really seems to tell a chronological story of how the deal was negotiated. At the very bottom, at number 7, you have the contractor's proposal. That's just the initial pitch, right? Here's how we think we can build it.
Yeah, it sits at the bottom because it's the opening bid. It hasn't survived the crucible of negotiation yet.
Okay. And above that, you have the employer's requirements, the original vision.
Right.
And above the requirements are the general conditions, the standard FIDIC rule book we're reading right now. But right above that, at number 4, are the particular conditions. I assume those are the custom tweaks.
Yeah, the particular conditions are where the real battlefield lies.
How so?
Well, the general conditions are standard, off-the-shelf rules. The particular conditions are the customized amendments where the parties alter the standard rules to fit their specific country, their specific laws, or just their specific risk appetite.
Ah, okay.
So, because they reflect actual custom negotiations, they naturally override the generic rules.
That makes perfect sense. Then at the top 3 spots, you have the letter of tender, the letter of acceptance, and sitting at the absolute peak, number 1, the contract agreement.
The contract agreement is the final handshake. It encapsulates the absolute final intent of both parties after all the arguments, the compromises, the late-night negotiations.
The ultimate boss document.
Exactly. If a spec in the early contractor's proposal says they'll use standard steel, but the final contract agreement specifies reinforced steel, the agreement at the top of the pyramid absolutely crushes the proposal at the bottom.
Okay, but the contractor isn't completely at the mercy of the employer's original, possibly flawed vision, right? I found this really brilliant mechanism in Clause 1 regarding finding errors.
Yes, the scrutiny clause.
Right. When the contractor finally gets onto the site and begins heavily scrutinizing the employer's requirements, if they spot a major defect, say, the concrete specifications are just totally insufficient for the soil type, they have an obligation to speak up.
They absolutely do.
They must give notice to the engineer within 42 days of the commencement date.
And that 42-day rule prevents the contractor from playing dumb.
What do you mean?
Well, they cannot knowingly build a doomed structure just because it was in the employer's blueprints, wait for it to crack, and then demand to be paid twice to rebuild it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they have an active duty to scrutinize the plans.
But what happens on day 43? If they miss that early window and discover the fatal flaw months into the build, who pays for the fix then?
Ah, that triggers a really fascinating legal test. The contractor must still notify the engineer immediately. But the engineer then has to make a ruling based on the concept of an experienced contractor exercising due care.
Okay, so the engineer has to ask, should a competent professional have spotted this error during that first 42 days?
Precisely the standard. If the engineer determines the flaw was obvious, like maybe the math was just fundamentally wrong on page 4 of the blueprints and the contractor missed it due to sheer negligence,
Yeah.
the contractor might have to absorb the cost of fixing it.
Ouch. That is an expensive math error.
Very. But if the engineer determines the error was, say, a deeply hidden geological anomaly that no reasonable amount of early scrutiny could have revealed, then it becomes a formal variation.
Meaning the employer pays.
Right. The employer has to pay the contractor extra time and money to fix the flawed design. It is all about holding the right party accountable at the exact right moment.
And that strict assignment of risk is a perfect bridge into how the contract handles liability in the law. Because the financial consequences of these mega projects going sideways are so catastrophic, the contract goes out of its way to cap the fallout.
Yeah, the division of legal compliance is actually highly practical here. The employer owns the land, so they are responsible for securing the high-level planning and zoning permits.
Yeah.
They navigate the local politics.
Well, the contractor handles the execution permits, right? They get the permissions to shut down highways, to move giant turbine blades, they pay the import taxes, they deal with customs, they handle the logistical reality of building.
Exactly. But the critical shield protecting both of them is the limitation of liability.
Right. The source text states explicitly that neither party is liable for indirect or consequential loss, like loss of profit or loss of use of the works.
And let's frame why that clause is strictly non-negotiable.
Okay.
Imagine a contractor is building a high-speed rail network connecting 2 major European cities. Due to a series of errors, the project is delayed by 6 months.
Happens all the time.
Right. If the contractor were held liable for the loss of profit, meaning the 6 months of lost ticket sales the employer suffered, the damages could easily be 10 times the value of the entire construction contract.
It would bankrupt any construction firm on earth.
Totally. It is a completely uninsurable risk. No bank would ever back a contractor who took on the liability of lost future profits.
So they put a hard ceiling on it. The total liability is capped at the accepted contract amount. So if you are hired for a $2 billion dam, your maximum total liability is $2 billion. End of story.
Mostly, yes, but with a few very important exceptions. The cap vanishes entirely in cases of fraud, gross negligence, deliberate default, or reckless misconduct.
Which makes sense. The law isn't going to let you use a contract to shield yourself if you intentionally use substandard, dangerous materials that put human life at risk.
Exactly. The courts will pierce the contract if you act with malicious or reckless intent. Plus, there are also specific carve-outs for intellectual property infringement.
Oh, like what?
Like if the contractor steals a patented turbine design, they hold the liability for that lawsuit. The employer isn't taking that hit.
Speaking of liability, there is a subtle wording nuance in the definitions that really caught my eye.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, throughout the rules, when the contractor submits a temporary design or a plan to the engineer often responds with a notice of no objection.
Ah, yes.
And that sounds so bizarrely passive-aggressive to me. Like, fine, do whatever you want. Why wouldn't a legal document just say the engineer approved the plan?
You've just stumbled onto one of the most critical legal force fields in the entire FIDIC system.
Really? Just from the word approve?
Yes. The difference between approval and no objection is entirely about the ownership of risk.
So if the engineer writes, I approve this design, they are legally validating it.
Yes. Let's say the contractor submits a design for a massive temporary scaffolding system to hold up a bridge deck.
Okay.
If the engineer explicitly approves the design and the scaffolding collapses a week later, the resulting lawsuit will be a total bloodbath.
Because the employer is on the hook now, too.
Exactly. The contractor will stand up in court and say, hey, we submitted the design and the employer's highly paid expert formally approved it. They share the blame.
The engineer accidentally adopted the liability.
Exactly. But if the engineer issues a notice of no objection, the legal framing shifts entirely.
So what does no objection actually mean in court?
The engineer is basically stating, I have reviewed your submission. I do not see any obvious violations of the contract that require me to stop you. However, this remains 100% your design, your method, and your risk. Proceed at your own peril.
Wow. It allows the work to move forward without the employer inadvertently co-signing the contractor's potential failures. That is brilliant. Every single word in this document is a loaded weapon.
It really is.
Yeah.
Which is why we see such intense obligations placed on the employer in Clause 2. We spent a lot of time on how the contractor's risk is managed, but Clause 2 outlines the employer's burden.
Because the employer cannot just sit back in a leather chair and write checks. They have aggressive affirmative duties.
Very aggressive.
The most immediate one being site access. Clause 2.1 mandates the employer must give the contractor right of access to and possession of the site. Obviously, you can't build the dam if the employer hasn't cleared the land or secured the property rights.
Right.
But there is a catch here, too. The employer can legally withhold possession of the site until they receive the contractor's performance security.
Yeah, and the performance security is a massive financial guarantee. It's usually a bond from an international bank, just proving the contractor actually has the resources to perform.
So the employer is essentially saying, I am not letting your fleets of bulldozers tear up my valley until you prove you have the financial backing to finish what you start.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And before the contractor even generates that bond, the employer owes them a massive data dump.
Right, the site data.
Yes. The employer must hand over all data on topography, subsurface conditions, hydrology, climatic conditions, all of it. And the key here is the timeline.
The contract dictates this data must be handed over before the base date, which is defined as exactly 28 days prior to the tender submission.
Right, and that 28-day window ensures the contractor has a realistic opportunity to actually price the true risks of the site into their final bid.
Because if the employer hands over a geological survey, like 2 days before the bid is due, showing the site is built on unstable shale instead of solid granite, the contractor can't possibly calculate the true cost of the foundation.
Exactly. And if the employer deliberately hides that data to keep the initial bids low, they will pay a severe premium later.
When the contractor inevitably hits that unstable shale and files a massive claim for an unforeseeable condition.
Exactly right. Clause 2 forces transparency early to prevent those catastrophic budget blowouts later.
Which brings us to the part of Clause 2 that genuinely stunned me. Subclause 2.4, financial arrangements. The employer doesn't just have to prove they have the money on day one. They have to prove they have the money when things get out of hand.
Because scope creep is the silent killer of megaprojects.
Oh, absolutely.
Historically, an employer might start with a baseline power plant, 6 months in, they issue a change order. Actually, let's upgrade all the cooling towers to handle higher capacity. Oh, and add an entire secondary control room.
And the contractor, wanting to keep the client happy, dutifully does the extra work and racks up tens of millions in new costs.
Yeah. And then, at the very end of the project, the employer reveals they never actually secured the financing for all those last-minute upgrades.
That's insane.
The employer defaults, and the contractor is left holding the bag, often going bankrupt in the process. So, Subclause 2.4 is the contractor's ultimate defense mechanism against that.
The triggers for this defense are incredible to read. If the contractor receives a variation instruction, basically a change order that costs more than 10% of the total accepted contract amount, or if a bunch of small change orders cumulatively add up to more than 30% of the total amount, the contractor can just hit the brakes.
Yep. They can legally demand reasonable evidence within 28 days that the employer actually has the financial arrangements in place to pay for the massive increase.
And on a $2 billion project, a 10% variation is a $200 million change order.
Exactly. The contractor is well within their rights to say, look, we aren't ordering $200 million worth of new turbines until you show us the bank statements proving you can actually cover the invoice.
It is a phenomenal power play. The hired help basically forcing the billionaire developer or sovereign government to open their books and prove their solvency.
It's totally unprecedented in normal contracts, yeah.
And if the employer can't prove it in 28 days, the contractor can slow down work or even suspend it entirely. It forces the employer to be just as financially disciplined as the contractor.
It creates this really beautiful symbiotic tension. Neither party can unilaterally force the other into ruin without tripping a massive alarm bell.
Man, let's pull all these threads together then. The FIDIC Yellow Book, Clauses 1 and 2, isn't just dry administrative paperwork.
Far from it.
We've seen how it constructs a highly delicate triad of power. You have the employer who funds and defines the vision. You have the contractor, often an intricate joint venture, executing the build and absorbing the physical risk. And hovering right between them, you have the engineer, paid by the employer, but legally bound to act as an impartial referee.
And stabilizing that whole triad are the relentless rules of engagement.
Right.
The strict hierarchy of documents resolving inevitable contradictions. The militant formatting of notices forcing issues out into the light immediately.
The careful parsing of words like no objection to prevent the accidental transfer of liability.
Exactly. And the mutual financial transparencies that keep scope creep from destroying the entire enterprise.
Every single mechanism is designed to channel human unpredictability into a manageable process. Which actually leaves me with one final thought for you listening. As I was going through the definitions in Clause 1, something wild stood out.
Oh, wait. What was that?
This highly sophisticated legal document goes out of its way to define the most basic human concepts imaginable. It explicitly states that a day means a calendar day. It clarifies that a year means exactly 365 days.
Oh, yeah. You can guarantee that clause exists because at some point on some massive project, an employer argued that a day meant a working day.
Or a year meant a fiscal year.
Right, and that semantic argument cost someone an absolute fortune.
It just makes you think, if we require over 100 pages of rigid hierarchies, hyperspecific definitions, and explicit clarifications of the word day just to build a power plant, what does that say about human nature?
That we're inherently slippery.
Maybe. Perhaps these massive international contracts aren't really about engineering steel and concrete at all. Maybe they are entirely about our deep-seated need to engineer trust in a world where we know, deep down, we can't even agree on what a day is when $1 billion is on the line.
A fascinating and highly accurate way to view the foundation of international law.
Something to keep in mind the next time you scroll past a terms and conditions box. That is our deep dive for today. Keep scrutinizing the fine print.